Have you ever had the feeling that someone knows more about you than they should? Small details, phrases thrown in at random, but which carry a weight. At first it seems just a coincidence, a well-aimed guess, a shrewd observation, but then it happens again, and again, and more, until it becomes impossible to ignore, until you realize it's not a coincidence. Now, imagine that this person, he's not just any. This is not a close friend, nor someone who has lived with you for years. He's your teacher. Someone who just be there to teach, to pass on knowledge, to correct your tests and nothing more. But for some reason, he seems to know a lot more than should. He knows things about your life, your habits, your thoughts. He mentions events from your intimate moments, stories you've never told anyone. And he says all this as if it were natural, as if I had always known. First, you try to justify it. Maybe he's just very observant. Maybe I heard something by chance, but then something changes. The comments begin to more precise, more intimate, small details that could not be discovered by chance. How does he know what your favorite song is? Does he know you hate celebrating birthdays? How does he know that when he was a child, he hid in the backyard whenever his parents fought? You never anyone this, not even to your own parents. Then one day he mentions something even deeper, something buried in your memory. A memory so that you had to stop yourself to check if it was real. And that's when a chill runs up your spine. Because you notice something he's not just teaching. He is studying you. Robert D. Hare, one of the world's leading experts on psychopathy, describes as masters of manipulation. They watch, they test the limits, they throw out little crumbs of information, waiting to see your reaction. They know how to get into your mind before you even realize you are being manipulated. And above all, they like the game. The scariest thing, the fact that he knows so much about you. It's the fact that he wants you to notice. He's enjoying watching your confusion grow. To see the exact moment when you will put the pieces together. The moment when you will finally understand, and when that happens, when you finally, maybe it's already too late. There was something unsettling about Marcos Almeida. At first, he just seemed like a captivating one of those who can easily capture the attention of any student. Young, charismatic, always involved and always attentive to what was happening around him. Unlike traditional teachers, he didn't just pour out information, he made it thought-provoking. But there was something more to him, something difficult to define. Daniel realized this in the first days of class. Was different, but not just because of his way of teaching. He seemed to understand his students in a strange, almost intimate way. It was as if he what they were thinking before they even said anything. He asked questions that touched on sensitive points. It created debates that students to expose themselves, to reveal their deepest opinions. At first, Daniel found this interesting. After all, Marco's just a teacher who really cared, right? He managed to keep the class engaged, knew how to provoke curiosity, and even encourage the shyer students. But then things started to change. And what once seemed like just a natural for communication began to become something disturbing. Because Marcos knew things about Daniel that he had said in class. The first time, Daniel ignored it. It was just a detail, a coincidence, but kept piling up. One afternoon, during a discussion about history and identity, Marcos smiled and said, "Some people avoid celebrating birthdays. Daniel? They prefer to go unnoticed, as if that date meant nothing." The room followed the flow of the conversation, but Daniel stopped. His body went for an instant. He had never mentioned it. He never told anyone that he hated his birthday, that he preferred to ignore the date. That always felt profound discomfort when someone tried to celebrate it. In the following days, there were more moments like this. Loose comments, phrases that seemed too small to be noticed, but that fell like sharp blades on Daniel's mind. Some songs mark us in a strange way. They remind us specific moments, of places where we used to hide when we needed time alone. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. That was too. When he was a kid, he used to sneak into the backyard and put on headphones to block out his parents' arguments. But nobody knew nobody. He tried to ignore it. He tried to convince himself that he was just imagining things. But then, one day, Marcos looked at him in the middle of class and said, "Some of us spend our whole lives being watched, without ever realizing it." Daniel's stomach. This was no longer a coincidence, that was a warning. The discomfort started to become constant. Daniel tried to ignore it, tried to himself that it was just coincidences, that Marcos was talking to the whole class, and that he was just being paranoid. But the problem was, more he tried to ignore it, the more the comments kept coming. In the middle of class, while explaining historical revolutions, Marcos interrupted his train of thought and said, as if he was just thinking out loud, "Some people prefer to remain silent, observing, waiting for right moment to act." The room continued normally, but not Daniel. His chest tightened. This was about him. Since he was little, was the type of person who avoided attention. I like to observe, to understand people before approaching them. He had always been reserved, discreet, invisible, but he had never said it out loud. He swallowed hard. Maybe he was just being paranoid. Perhaps. But then, days later, something worse. The class was discussing ancient rituals and traditions when Marcos smiled, crossed his arms, and said in a casual tone, "Curious. Some people don't like celebrating birthdays, right, Daniel?" Daniel's eyes widened. The shock was instantaneous, but he tried to hide it. The worst of is that the comment went unnoticed by the class, but not for him. How did he know? Daniel hated celebrating birthdays. He always hated the center of attention, the forced parties, the congratulations sung automatically, but that wasn't something he told others. It was intimate, personal detail. His parents knew, maybe one or two close friends, but it was never something he mentioned at school. He tried to himself that it was a coincidence, a logical deduction, a hunch. But even if it were, why would Mark have mentioned exactly that? And then the third time. It was a rainy morning, and the class was discussing the impact of music on society throughout history. The matter was normally when Marcos once again launched a comment that seemed to have nothing to do with the context. Music has a strange power. A single song can remind us of that specific moment, when we hide in the backyard to escape our problems. Daniel froze. His body went rigid, his gripping the pen tightly. He knew that feeling. When he was a child, whenever his parents fought, and they fought a lot, he would run away to backyard. He took out his headphones, turned on some loud music and closed eyes, trying to tune out the world, trying to pretend that those discussions didn't exist. It was his refuge. And now suddenly someone was talking about it. Daniel looked at Marcos. The teacher wasn't looking at him. He continued talking, gesturing, in his own speech. But he knew. He knew. Daniel's mind began to spin. What was happening? How did Marcos know these things? They were small but specific details. It couldn't be that these were just random deductions. He tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe someone had told him. Maybe his parents knew Marcos from somewhere. Perhaps he had overheard a conversation by chance. But none of these made sense. None of this explained what was happening. In the following days, Daniel began to become more attentive. Every time spoke, he analyzed every word, every intonation, every look. And he noticed something terrifying. Marcos never looked directly at him when said these things. He always threw sentences into the air, as if they were part of a loose thought. But now, knew this was part of the game. He wanted Daniel to notice. He wanted him to put the pieces together. And the worst part, he wanted to see her. Daniel's stomach dropped every time he entered the room. He felt a weight in the air, an invisible pressure that suffocated him. If I were being watched all the time. And maybe he was, because now he knew that Marcos, he wasn't just a teacher, he was an observer. And he was for something. Let me ask you something. Would you notice the signs before it was too late? Most people only realize it when they are involved in a manipulator's web. What if someone is already watching you right now? Testing your limits, you even realizing it? Leave your like before this story disappears from your feed, and subscribe now so you don't miss the next about dangerous minds that may be closer than you think. Some stories are only told once, and some people never get the chance to hear the warning. Activate the bell and make sure you see the story before it's too late. Daniel felt something was wrong, very wrong. The days passed, but the feeling discomfort only increased. Every time he entered the classroom, he felt like he was stepping into unfamiliar territory, a place where had hidden meanings and looks lasted a second longer than they should have. Marcos remained the same, always calm, always with that tone of voice, always smiling in a way that seemed to know something that no one else did. and Daniel knew that smile was for him. Every sentence spoken in class seemed charged with intent. Marcos kept throwing out vague comments, subtle references to things that no one but Daniel understand. But what scared him most wasn't what Marcos said. It was like he said, with a casual naturally, as if that wasn't a big deal. And that made Daniel realize something even worse. Marcos was used to this. It wasn't something that happened by chance, that it was a game. And Daniel was the only one who knew he was playing. At first, he not to react, pretend nothing was happening, but inside his mind worked non-stop trying to find a logical explanation. How did Marcos know so much him? How could a teacher he had only met a few weeks ago seem to know more about his life than his own parents? And then, changed. That afternoon after class, Daniel was already putting away his materials when he heard Marcos' voice calling his name. "Daniel, can I talk to you for a moment?" His stomach dropped. His first instinct was to make up an excuse and get out of there, but he knew that if he refused, he'd be showing that he was scared, so he stayed. The other students left one by one. When the room was empty, Marcos leaned against the table in his arms, analyzing Daniel with that studied look, as if he were evaluating every detail of his reaction. "You are a very intelligent student," he began. "But more than that, you see the world in a different way." Daniel didn't respond. He knew this was no conversation. "I know that sometimes you feel misunderstood," Marcos continued, as if he was stating something that was already, "I know there are things you don't say to anyone. Thoughts that go through your head that not even family would understand." Daniel felt a shiver run up his spine. "I understand you better," than that phrase kept echoing in his mind, as if it were written somewhere inside his brain. The way Marcos said that, it seemed like a compliment. It looked like a finding. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He realized Marcos didn't expect him to say anything. He already knew the answer. That's what made everything worse. The silence lasted for a moment. Marcos kept his eyes fixed on him, and at that moment Daniel realized something. Marcos was enjoying that he was enjoying Daniel's discomfort. There was nothing random about it. It was a test. Daniel needed to get out of there. "I need to go," he said, quickly grabbing his backpack. Marcos nodded, still with that light smile on his lips. "Of course. Think about what I said." "I'm sure you will understand." Daniel left the room hurriedly, trying to put that moment out of his mind, but I couldn't. Because now he knew. It going to stop here? Daniel knew something was wrong. With each encounter with Marcos, the feeling that he was more than just an eccentric teacher stronger. That phrase echoed in his mind over and over again. "I understand you better anyone." How could someone he only met a few weeks ago say that? How someone who in theory was just a newly arrived teacher be sure of something so intimate? That didn't make sense. Doubt began to consume Daniel. Needed to understand who Marcos was. I needed to find out what was going on. As soon as he got home that night, he opened his laptop and typed the name on Facebook. Nothing. No profile with that photo, no mention of his name. He looked on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, nothing. That didn't make sense. Who these days doesn't have at least one social network? Daniel decided to try another approach. He, the school website, entered the staff area and searched for the name Marcos Almeida. Nothing. No photos, no registration forms, no mention. It was as if he didn't exist before that year. Daniel's stomach dropped. Did that mean he wasn't on the school's records before that school year? Did mean no one knew where he came from? How come no one thought it was strange for a professor to appear out of nowhere, with no history, no past? Know of his existence before that moment? This was not normal. Daniel's mind began to work quickly. What if Marcos wasn't a real teacher? What if he was for another reason? A specific reason? What if he was there for him? Daniel shook his head, trying to clear his own thoughts. That was, he was letting himself go. But then an even scarier thought arose. If Marcos always knew so much about him, could this really be their first? Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He stood up from the chair, his chest feeling tight. There was a way to know. There a way to find out if Marcos was part of his life, before he even noticed. He ran to the bookshelf where his mother kept her old photo albums. He out one of the older volumes, with its worn leather cover, and opened it. The yellowed pages were filled with memories of a time that seemed so ago now. He flipped through it quickly, feeling his nervousness growing. If was there? If he was already part of your life even before he was your teacher? And then he saw it. His fingers froze on the page. The air heavy. His chest stopped for a moment. It was an old photo from when he was 6 years old. He was in a playground sitting on the slide. His was off to the side, smiling at the camera. It was an ordinary scene, an innocent moment from his childhood. But that wasn't what made Daniel's go cold. That's what was in the background of the photo. There, among the other parents and children, a man stood. Wore a dark cap. His face was partially shadowed, but his eyes were fixed on Daniel. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't look at anyone him. He looked just for him. And even with the years that had passed, even with the low quality of the photo, Daniel that face immediately. It was Marcos. The album fell out of his hands. Air no longer entered his lungs. That wasn't possible. That it wasn't the man he met just a few weeks ago was in that photo more than a decade ago. He felt his legs weaken, his body losing strength. He screamed, trying to find any rational explanation for this. Maybe it was just similar. Maybe it was someone else, but he knew it wasn't. He knew that expression. It was the same. The way he watched, it was the same. And then the worst question of all popped into his mind. If Marcos already there at that time, how long had he really been watching? Daniel's heart raced like never before. His stomach dropped. The room to spin around him. This was no coincidence. This was never a coincidence. He needed a few seconds to compose himself. He slammed the album, the noise echoing through the silent room. His entire body was shaking. That explained everything. It explained Marcos's look. His comments. It explained the certainty he had in saying, "I understand you better than anyone." Because Marcos always been there. I never to be seen until now. But the question that really mattered was something else. Why? Why now? And more than that, what did he really? Daniel looked at the bedroom door, as if expecting it to open on its own at any moment. He felt, for the first, that I was no longer safe there. That maybe never been. The album was still on the floor. The image of Marcos, standing in of that old photograph, continued to burn in Daniel's mind. This was not a mistake. It wasn't a coincidence. He was there. Always has, but why? Sleep didn't come that night. Every sound inside the house seemed amplified, the clock ticking, the wind blowing against the rapid breathing he tried to control. The fear was now concrete. It was no longer paranoia. For the first time, Daniel that needed to do something. The next morning, before class even started, he arrived early. The hallway was empty, and the door to the staff was ajar. His heart was pounding as he entered. The room had a strong smell of coffee and old paper. He looked around, the tables, the cupboards, but there was nothing to indicate that Marcos actually worked there. No books, no notebooks, no drawers with your name on, nothing. It was as if he just appeared and disappeared every day, leaving no trace. The sound of footsteps echoed through hallway, and Daniel quickly moved away, leaving the room before he was seen. He needed to face him. When Marcos entered the classroom that morning, Daniel was already waiting. His entire body was tense, but he forced himself to appear calm. Teacher looked around the class, gave a slight smile, and began to speak. "I hope everyone reviewed the content for today." But Daniel couldn't wait. "Are you?" The room fell silent. The air seemed to grow heavier. Marcos looked up at Daniel, his face impassive. "Like this?" Daniel's heart hammered his chest. He felt his classmates' eyes on him, but he didn't care. "You know too much about me," he continued, trying to keep voice steady. "Things no one else knows, things you have no way of knowing." Marcos crossed his arms, keeping his expression calm. "Daniel, I'm your teacher. Teachers observe their students. That's part of the job. Not like this." Daniel's voice was stronger than I saw the photo. The first trace of change in Marcos's expression was subtle, a little sparkle in the eyes. "Photo?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. Daniel felt his mouth dry. "In my mother's album, I was 6 years old. You were there." The room was absolute silence. Some students began to look at each other, confused. To them, it seemed like a pointless discussion. But for Daniel, it a watershed. And then Marcos smiled. Not an ordinary smile, it was a slow, calculated smile, as if he had been waiting for this moment. He leaned his body forward, resting his hands on the table. "You don't remember me, but I've always been here." Daniel's heart almost stopped. Time to freeze around him. Every strand of his body was on alert. What? Since before you were born? The phrase echoed in Daniel's mind like the classroom disappeared. The world around disappeared. All that was left was he and Marcos. His muscles were he felt his blood run cold in his veins, that it couldn't be real. He wanted to respond, he wanted to scream, he wanted to demand, but for some reason couldn't move. Marcos continued looking at him, and the smile was still there. As if he knew what Daniel was, as if he always knew. Daniel felt an intense cold run down his spine. This couldn't be happening. His eyes were fixed on cell phone screen, on the distorted edges of the photo, on the shadow in the corner of the image that indicated a presence, someone standing there next to his bed, watching him as he slept. The air around felt heavy. His chest rose and fell irregularly, and the only thing he could hear was his own heart beating. Too strong, too fast. Time to be dragging on, each second lengthening unbearably. The first thing Daniel did was throw the cell phone away, as if the image could jump off screen and grab him. But the fear was already inside him. He ran his hands over his face, trying to catch his breath. His mind was spinning. How was this photo taken? How did someone manage to get into his room without him noticing? No, he knew the answer. Marcos. His body tensed. Thoughts were confused. Marcos hadn't just disappeared, he was still around. Daniel took a deep breath and picked up his cell phone. His fingers trembled as he enlarged the photo, analyzing every corner of the image. Your bed. Messy sheets. The faint glow of the hallway light filtering through the half-open door. Everything seemed normal, except for the shadowy silhouette on side of the photo. He felt his stomach drop. There was someone there, and the worst. This person was close enough he could hear their breathing. Daniel jumped out of bed and ran to the bedroom door. Locked. His sweaty hands turned the hard, as if he expected it to be unlocked by some mistake. But it wasn't. So how did someone get in there? He swallowed and turned to the window. Locked too, but none of that mattered. Someone has already been there, and if you were once, could come back. Mind worked at high speed. He opened his phone's gallery and returned to the photo. There was something there that he hadn't noticed before. Something, but it made his entire body freeze. The corner of the image. On the wall next to the head of the bed, there was a handwritten message. Felt the air escape from his lungs. The handwriting was the same as Marcos. Slowly he enlarged the image and read the words, feeling a deep shiver over his body. Do you believe in coincidences, Daniel? He felt his legs weaken. A suffocating weight took over his chest. This just a warning. It was a game. He felt his skin tingle. Instinct screamed for him to get out of there, to run away, not to look back. But he moved, because at that moment he realized that Marcos was always ahead of him. I always knew what he would do. Daniel felt a wave of despair in his throat. His gaze darted around the room. If Marcos could get in there once, he could be there now. His heart in his chest. He took out his cell phone and started dialing the police. His fingers were sweaty, slipping on the screen. But before he pressed the call button, his cell phone vibrated. A new message, this time without an attachment. Just 3 words. See you soon. Felt a shiver so strong that his entire body was paralyzed. The message had no sender, and for the first time, he was absolutely sure. Will never end. Daniel believed the worst was over. He faced Marcos, looked for answers, tried to understand. But some truths are not spoken out loud, are revealed little by little. Marcos's silence was not an end. It was just the beginning of something bigger. Because psychopaths, they don't say goodbye, they watch, they wait, and just when you think you're safe and they come back. That night, slept believing he was alone, but I wasn't. The email arrived without warning. No sender, no subject, no text, just an image. A photo of him taken the night before. Now tell me, have you ever had the feeling that someone knows more about you than they should? Have you noticed looks, coincidences that don't seem so natural? Have you ever ignored that shiver on the back of your neck? That feeling of being because you thought it was all in your head? If so, comment here. I know what it's like. Because this could be happening to right now when you didn't even realize it. But here's a warning. Not gets an alert. Not everyone notices the signs in time. Leave your like now, subscribe and turn on notifications. And click on the next before it disappears from your screen. Because some stories, they don't end when you stop watching.